All right, let's talk about the what David Dole brought up in a video about how Justin Trudeau's Canadian government quietly sold basically weapons of war and murder and destruction to Saudi Arabia during the time of the pandemic and so on and so forth. The same thing that the U.S. does. But Trump is being more open and blatant about it. But something that David pointed out, and which is something I was already aware of, is how Canada is looked on as this peacekeeping nation, and this is something I wasn't aware of, but I guess it was like 62 or 64 or 68 Canadian troops, and and that is, I guess, a peacekeeping force. Whatever. But that's something I wanted to do a topic on. This whole idea of peacekeeping force. I think if you're paying attention, you understand. You get this. You get the stark contradiction. Because it seems like everywhere that the West, and I state the West, and emphasize that, every single place that the West places a peacekeeping force, it seems to do the exact opposite. We've all seen the dramatically tragic consequences for those people living where the peacekeeping forces end up. Well, maybe not all. Those of us keeping track of things. And one thing that's I've come to understand is that, the UN is held in such high esteem. They're given so much credit for so much. But there's hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of examples of where the UN is clearly the bad actor. Just like the ICC, clearly a bad actor. Just as NATO is clearly a bad actor. Something that a lot of people don't know is that the French Foreign Legion is still operating. It's still a thing. The French, and he's supposed to be, and the French and the French Foreign Legion is considered to be through media and governments and the UN and so on as a peacekeeping force, except they're running around all over Africa and other places, committing atrocities left, right, and center, and of course the French Foreign Legion is something that they were using way back, and it became more prominent during the World Wars, and so on and so forth. And they're still operating, and they're committing atrocities left, right, and center. They're not they're not doing peacekeeping. If anything, they're often basically a mercenary force for the governments that the French have built a tie with. And when I say the French, and I'm not talking about the French people, I'm talking about the French government, which is oxymoronic, as they clearly are not a government. They're more of a cartel of high criminals. And the same thing with NATO. U.S. constantly uses peacekeeping force. When they're talking about their sending their aggressive, very aggressive and very destabilizing, murderous forces to go do peacekeeping. Although they often call it intervention, but basically it's an invasion force. And those of us keeping track understand this because we've been able to think more critically. We've been able to see this thing. So we have to understand that there is no such thing as a peacekeeping force. It's always an invasion force. The French Foreign Legion, actually, one of the driving forces for the French Foreign Legion is that the French have currency and monetary control over a lot of the so-called independent, after decolonizing. But the thing is that's not the case. If you're paying attention, you know that the decolonization is complete bullshit, and that the West has a stranglehold on the economics through the way they do the monetary and financial system, which basically comes down to banking. And so, just as the U.S. Became the financial and banking power in the world after World War II, I'd say it's even before the World War II, World War I and World War II, which is how the U.S. became the behemoth that it is today. So understanding all of this is integral, but like the UN, for example. There are, as I said, hundreds of credible crimes that have been leveled against them that involve drug trafficking, sex trafficking, black marketeering, raping, murder, just as the French Foreign Legion and the U.S. Peacekeeping intervention forces, which the West, and it's largely the West, who have so that'd be Western Europe, Australia, and other places who are reaping the materialistic gains at the sacrifice of millions of lives, the destabilization, the complete and utter pillaging and plundering of the natural world, which we all need to be healthy so that it can sustain us. The IMF, the World Bank, and all these other institutions, this is stuff that was pushed by the West, and meaning Western Europe and the Western hereditary conquered colonial nations. And it's like, if you look into if you look into how much of Africa was basically allotted through UN, and in the biggest players were Germany, France, Britain, and so on and so forth. And this isn't ancient history. This is back. After the war, World War II, and leading up into the 1990s and early 2000s, and so so it's like, if you watch and if you research it, you're gonna see that. And so you can find videos about how the countries, about decolonization and all that other stuff, and all you have to do is pay just a little bit of interest and curiosity into it, and you can see how that dynamic worked. It was basically the Western Europe and the U.S. basically dictating who gets what, and that who gets what is basically people, and in the natural world, and then you find out how truly horrifically destructive and psychotic. Israel was basically formed due to the West, and this is supposed to be the UN, or the League of Nations, which is basically the precursor to the UN. As I said, with the ICC, it's like you don't see any of the Western nations, except for the time of Nazism, of the Third Reich in the Second World War, but you really don't see the Western nations paying for any of it. If anything, we get the history of, the Brits were the ones who were receiving the aggression. The French were the ones getting the aggression. But the thing is there were causes. There were causes for what took place. And the Brits, the French, and all those other Western nations were doing things that directly impacted the reason why the First World War happened and the Second World War happened, and the U.S. played a role. One of the things that I've come to understand is that it was the world wars also had something to do had something to do with colonialism, and there was a direct connection. That's the way I see it, because I'm following their histories. So, as I've stated in other videos, like Western nations were directly involved in narco trafficking during the first and second opium wars with China. It's something that they created themselves, and Russians are not faultless in that. They were involved. The U.S. was definitely involved. Japan. I made another video about how Japan would have been an insular nation, more concentrated on trying to cement who was going to be the top dog. Had the West not had the Western nations, that includes the ones that are held so in high degree, like Denmark and Switzerland and all these other places. They were part of the West that was interfering in the internals of Japan and giving rise to the fears of those in Japan through many vectors, and it was legitimate fear, which is why the Japanese became proactive and became the butchering, murderous, aggressive invaders that they became, which led to them joining, partly with Nazi Germany as one of the Axis powers. So, this is something that and Christianity and the Roman Catholic Church were directly involved with the evangelical. The Japanese didn't want Christianity, but working in tandem with the Western nations, they forced Christian evangelicals to into the country, and so on and so forth. So this is why I state what I state. If you live in the West and you hear peacekeeping, but they say, oh, well, Ghana's involved, or all these countries that aren't of the West, but you see how it doesn't advantage any of them, and it's always everything seems to always go back to the West. You hear, from the head of the UN, and they're talking about climate change, and they're talking about inequality, they're talking about economic inequality, they're talking about racial inequality. You hear all this stuff, but the inequality just gets worse. The people are living under corrupt criminals who through these interventions or these economic vectors or these or the mining rights or the oil rights and all these other stuff, whether it's agricultural, it doesn't matter. It's always bad for the vast majority of those people living in those places, and so like Indonesia and Vietnam and Cambodia and you name it, the vast majority of them are in horrible shape, and the governments, like China did, are bringing in are bringing in, allowing Western corporations to go in, basically make serfs and peasants, so that they can produce stuff for the West. And and so the UN pointing out, but they're the ones they're the ones they're the ones doing propaganda. Oh, we're so good, we're so good, but but their policy and other stuff is the reverse. Same as the ICC, same as the IMF, the World Bank, and all those. They're all Western hegemonic institutions. They're the ones promoting terrorism. They're the ones promoting dictatorships. They're the ones doing all the horrible things. So when China levels, China's been a bitch boy for hundreds of years, and now they're starting to see some more equity for the ruling class to combat the aggression. And that doesn't make them any more right, but at least they have a legitimate grievance, and so it all comes back to it. I mean, the petrodollar is basically a concept created by the U.S. Exploiting exploiting everything. But you notice how the U.S. Funded the rapid reconstruction of Western Europe and Europe in general. Why? Because the U.S. couldn't do it. Couldn't do what it wanted without other nations like the West, and because the West is largely populated by the quote unquote white people. There had to be a semblance of solidarity. The U.S. didn't give money to China. They didn't give money to Russia. They didn't give money to all the places that the West had basically destroyed in every aspect. And you have U.S. corporations. They spent decades, centering on Africa, but it's always their ignorance. They didn't come out and say ignorant savages and so on, but that's basically what they were insinuating. So it has to be that we have to realize, those of us who live in the West and those countries that have been affected by the Western world's infected by the Western world, such as Japan and South Korea and China to a large degree. Obviously, South America and Central America, never mind Mexico and everywhere else around the world. Basically, this infection has seeded greater mental instability in a global population of humans. And the thing is we should be thinking in terms of Terran, meaning the planet itself. We are Terrans. We are part of nature. And when we start thinking critically, like I tried to do on this video, we can see the interconnection, we can see the disparity, the inequality, and the crimes being committed upon us collectively. And when we're more informed, we get a better balance, and our anger and our fears are directed in a clearer, more directed focus. And we can share this and get ourselves more collected in combating, because we live day to day, minute by minute, hour by hour, from the time we are born in insanity. And this insanity is destructive, because whether you're just the good little people and going to work and doing what the societal insanity says is good for us, then we will continue to ride this roller coaster to the bottom that will ultimately kill us all. Thank you for watching.